Welcome to Missionary Roundtable with your host, Cale Horvath.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Missionary Roundtable, the podcast that's all about the Great Commission and looking behind the scenes, peeking behind the curtain, if you will, at what goes on to do international missions. Now, this isn't just a podcast for those who are missionaries or who want to be missionaries, but even for the people in their local churches who would love to know how missionaries do their job or how one becomes a missionary or how you can better support missions and missionaries. So if you're someone who likes to learn behind the scenes, I'm glad you're here. And if you're someone who is a prospective missionary or a missionary on deputation, or maybe you're new on your field and you're just looking for resources, I hope this can be a huge help for you. This episode is a long episode. I usually try to keep them around an hour, but there's a lot of really good information here, and I wanted this conversation to be helpful and not just abbreviated. So I'm really excited for this conversation, guys, that we've got today. It's with my friend James Fyffe, a veteran missionary. He's currently a pastor at Midtown Baptist Temple in Kansas City, Missouri. He was a missionary in Pakistan for over 4 years. He also served in El Salvador. He speaks he speaks English as his native language. He learned Spanish as a young man, and he learned Urdu later in life when he lived in Pakistan. And so we're going to have a conversation today about the all mysterious language learning. I am currently learning Hungarian. I've been learning it for over 3 years now. I'm at an intermediate level and still progressing, still haven't met my goals of fluency. But what I hope to do today with James is not just compare notes on how to learn a language, but also compare notes on the differences between languages, the differences between English, Spanish, Urdu, Hungarian. In there, you've got Latin-based languages, you've got Latin-based alphabets, you've got non-Latin-based languages and non-Latin alphabets, and there's a lot you can learn about languages by comparing the different experiences learning them. And so I hope that this can demystify some things for you about the language learning process. And if you happen to be learning a new language and you're struggling, because it's a struggle, it's really hard. It's one of the hardest things that you can do as an adult is to learn a second language to a point of proficiency that you can share the gospel and preach the gospel to somebody, and not just buy bread at the supermarket. There are different goals to language learning. And so it's a great conversation with my friend James. James also teaches the missions classes at Living Faith Bible Institute. So he's very knowledgeable in this. Our conversation goes all over the place, from strategies to differences in languages to grammar to the levels of language learning. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. I know it's a little bit long, but I hope that it's beneficial to you. So without further ado, here you go. James, good to see you again, man. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
Yeah, me too, man. And I was saying before I hit record, almost 4 years ago, you and I had a conversation in season 1 of this podcast about your past missionary experience in the 1040 window and then language learning. And really, that was me dipping my toes in the water because I hadn't done anything other than really studying some vocabulary in preparation to go to the field. And so now, 3 years into learning this crazy hard language, I've been learning some things that I think could be really helpful to people, but I'm also really excited to talk to you speaking 3 languages. Well, we're not going to speak 3 languages, but you speak 3 languages, and comparing some of those different strategies and lessons that we can learn from that. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And it's a super important topic. I'm sure you'll come back to that idea. For missionaries, you have to learn language, so we've got to figure out how to do it. Hopefully some of our struggles and banging our head against a wall will either give hope or maybe if we don't give strategy, at least we can give hope.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can give me some hope too, because I'm still in it, man. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking as someone who has done it, booked it, and like, all right, let me share the wisdom. I'm in the middle. So
yes.
Yeah, that'll be great. And
That's a really
something
good spot to reflect from, though.
Yeah, true. And something that Jeff Bartell told me when I was kind of like in my first year of learning, which is really a hard spot because you're really like you want to be at the end, but you're still kind of at the beginning, even though you've got a whole year into it. And
Hmm.
he's like, man, language learning, you have to take it day by day and week by week. You have to like look at like, okay, where am I today compared to yesterday, compared to last week, compared to last month? You can't just
Hmm.
always, if you're just always looking at the end goal, you're gonna feel deflated all the time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Big goal takes a long time.
Oh yeah, man. And there's different goals too, and so that'll be we'll talk about that too. But something I mentioned to you beforehand, I feel like in missions, and I'll just speak from our experience, like with our fellowship of churches, because I don't want
Hmm.
to talk about every independent Baptist missionary or other denominations, but I feel like in our fellowship we do a really good job of preparing anyone who goes through Bible Institute to be a pastor or missionary in Bible, in doctrinal training, in even practical training. But there's two things that not just our fellowship doesn't like key into. I'm not saying we don't do well, and I'm saying that like it seems like it's just really hard to teach about deputation and language learning, and I think it's probably because it's so personalized. Like I mean,
Hmm.
there's hundreds of language you might have to learn depending on where you want to go, and
Right.
there's different amounts of money you might have to raise. So those two things seem to be the mysterious missions things that like, ah man, you're just gonna have to figure it out when you get there.
No, that's very true. I'm teaching through Introduction to Missions in LFBI right now. And, I fly through language as a topic, but we don't dive into it. You could really do language for weeks, and you could probably do 8 weeks. You
Sure.
could do half a semester on language. And then, same thing with deputation. We'll cover it for a few minutes.
Hmm.
I do have a nice little book, a little deputation helper, a
Hey,
deputation guide.
that it might already be outdated. I don't know. Like it's
Some parts of it, yeah. Well, and
things
and that,
change so fast.
and that's part of the struggle with teaching it, though.
Yeah, you're
As
right.
everything changes,
You're absolutely right.
everything that you wrote in that book, in terms of specific strategy, uh,
Yeah,
that was 4 years ago. What good is
right,
that?
right. And even like with language, as we'll talk about, like there's always new apps and new resources that are coming out. But like if you go back in time 10 years, 15
Hmm.
years for sure, maybe even 10 years, as smartphones just have become a thing in the last decade. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, you go back in time 10 to 15 years, and there was only like one or two ways to study a new language without moving there and being immersed. It was like
Yeah,
Pimsleur and Rosetta Stone, or like good luck. But now in the last 10 years, there's hundreds of ways that you could start studying a new language.
I saw just this morning when I jumped online. I don't remember what I was looking for, but an ad popped up about language learning. It was some
Mhm.
guy promoting some new website or some new app. Yeah, it happens all the time.
Oh yeah, and if you listen to podcasts, there's probably. By the way, our episode today is sponsored by Babbel. No, not really, but I
Yeah.
feel like I hear Babbel ads constantly.
Hmm.
And that only works if you're learning one of the top like 10 or 15 languages in the world. If you're going to go to like Eastern Europe, like good luck finding an app for that that
Right.
one.
Yeah.
But
Duolingo
they're
hasn't made it there yet.
yeah, but they're start that's what I mean, like in every 4 or 5 years there's more and more and more. So it's a blessing and a curse because there are more opportunities today than there were.
Yeah.
But then it's also hard to teach that, like you said.
Yeah. Well, we
So
moved to Pakistan 10 years ago. So
well,
you,
yeah,
you
what year was
mentioned
that?
we went actually in January of or February of 15, so almost 10 years
Wow.
ago, right
Wow.
up
That's
over 9
wild.
years ago.
Hmm.
But I remember 10 years ago, right before we went, I had some Pimsleur CDs.
Yeah, yeah. CDs too. CDs,
Yeah,
not files.
no,
Man.
I'd put them in the CD player in my car, and I would drive around listening to Urdu.
Yeah, yeah. I had the Pimsleur Hungarian, and there's things that when I moved here, I tried to use lines I heard, and they either were so old that like people looked at you funny, or it was like we wouldn't even say that. It's like, well, this is like a respected,
Right.
language thing. So, but that is getting better with time and technology. But one of my goals with today's episode is to maybe, hopefully, demystify a little bit
Hmm.
of the process of language learning if you're going to be a missionary, and a peek behind the scenes for those that aren't going to be missionaries to see what goes into that. Now, something we're not going to really talk about too much is what we talked about in the first episode that people can go back and listen to from 4 years ago, is how important it is to learn the language if you're going to be a missionary. Like
Right.
you gotta try. And if you go to the field when you're older and you can't ever learn it fluently and perfect, you gotta try. It's the effort that counts. The people will respect it. So let's just put that aside and assume we're all on the same page. You got to put in the effort to learn the language. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what can we talk about? I think there's so many things I'd like to get into that we could start on, but let's just do this. Something I didn't realize until I started learning a language was that there are different goals, not just for missionaries. Anyone who's going to learn a second language, there's different goals. And so, the word fluency gets floated around a lot. But like if you're just a person who wants to be able to speak Spanish, like with your coworkers or because you're going on a trip or something, that's a different goal. Basic conversational, get around the city. That's a way different goal than what a missionary wants to do, which is talk to somebody about their deepest heart desires and philosophy and counseling and Bible doctrines and reading a Bible that was often translated hundreds of years ago. And I mean, that's just a completely different goal, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you could pick up, like resort level. I'm going on a vacation. I want to order some food.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could do that in weeks.
Sure.
You could do that pretty quickly, and you could get some level of comfort, and feel like you accomplished something in a couple of weeks. But yeah, and if that's your only goal, then that's great. Like you nailed it, knocked it out of the park. But when you want to teach something, oh my,
yeah. Well, it's just, and I say that because if you understand the expectation of where you need to get is so much beyond, as a missionary, it's so much farther beyond what a typical person's goal is to picking up a secondary language. It took a little pressure off of me when I realized like, oh, it's not going to happen overnight. Even if I work my butt off, it's going to take a while. And that really helped alleviate some of the burden I was putting on myself,
Yeah, well, and for Bible teaching in particular, and we'll come back to that, but how often am I looking up words even in English now? If I'm really studying, I'm doing word studies. I'm trying to learn and understand the way the Bible's using words in English.
Yeah,
and I've been speaking English for 40 some years now. So I'm still learning in my primary language. I'm still engaging with language learning at that teach people the Bible level. So to think that you're going to get there in a year or two, or that you'll ever actually get done, is kind of crazy.
That's fair. Now there is something to be said of like, okay, I'm a prospective missionary. I'm going to move to the field soon. What should be my goal? What should I be looking at as far as organized classroom time? And I heard different. I heard like one of two answers was like, depending on how hard your language is, 1 to 2 years of like organized classroom time and then get out and start doing it. Before I give my thoughts, is that fair? Do you have, a different opinion on that?
So going into to Urdu language learning, I mentioned a minute ago, I had Pimsleur CDs. I listened to those a little bit. They didn't really help me with language learning. I think more I was just picking up sounds and trying to get the feel of what it sounded like.
Break the ice a little.
When we got there, the expectation was that we would spend the first year to year and a half in full-time language. And what that meant was we had a private tutor that would come for 4 hours a day. And then the expectation was for the other 4 hours that we review and do personal study and then go out into the community and practice. So the expectation was basically 8 hours a day for a year to a year and a half to start our language learning.
Yeah. And Urdu would be a definitely difficult language. I'm going to pull up, let's see, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not, you can go watch the video version on YouTube. I'm going to try to share a screen with you. There it is. All right, let me hit share screen. And okay, so this is a map that I saw frequently, James. Can
Uh-huh.
you see that, or should I zoom it?
I can kind of see it.
All right, let me try zooming
Maybe
this in a
zoom it.
little bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is that a little better?
Yeah,
All right.
there we go.
So this map, basically, I've seen this thrown out a lot, and I think, let me get these ads out of here, stinking Google ads. This is something that if you're just listening, it says that this is a Foreign Service Institute language difficulty ranking, and it's a map of Europe with different colors on each country. And the blurb says it's the Foreign Service Institute has created a list based on their experience training U.S. diplomats, so it's like a governmental thing, to show the approximate time needed to learn a specific language as an English speaker, i.e., the number of weeks of study time to reach speaking and reading proficiency. And so even that alone, if you're just, thinking about it, is like, well, okay, so what is a week of learning, and what is reading and speaking proficiency? So already we have subjective goals.
Right.
But if you're just looking at the map and what it says, like, okay, so as an English speaker, you got category 1 through 5 here. Category 1 are the red countries, and it says about 24 weeks. And so that's got like Spanish and French and Italian. And then you get to category 2, a little bit harder. It's got like German. Well, Austria also speaks German. So basically German. Category 3, I don't even see any category 3 colors. Category 4, and category 4 plus, I guess. You got green and blue. Is, the more difficult, and that says 44 or more weeks, and category 5, which would be like Arabic and things like that, at about 88 weeks. Now, what does that all even mean? I don't know, but I think my point is, if you're an American English speaker who's going to become a missionary and you speak 0 other languages, depending on where you go, you're going to have different goals. And so if you haven't learned Spanish, but you're going to a Spanish-speaking country, maybe 1 year of intensive classes will be sufficient for you to get out and actually start doing your job. As a man learning Hungarian from being a monolingual English speaker, I have been learning, now not every week, I did probably a year and a half of 4 days a week intensive classroom study online. And then after that, ever since, so 3 years now, I've had it either 2 classes a week, or now for the last, 6 months to a year, I've been doing 1 class a week as I just continue to practice with my teacher, learn more grammar, and ask her questions. So I'm still taking lessons, but not in a full-time capacity. But yeah, so I guess really what I just want to chat about, I'll stop sharing that window for a sec, unless you want to talk about that map at all.
Point out Hungary on that map real quick.
Yeah, so that's the little blue guy right there in the middle, in between red Romania and yellow. I don't know if they can see my cursor or not when I'm sharing that screen.
There, yeah, I can see it right there.
Yeah.
So it's not even a category 5.
It's not. Whatever that means.
4 plus.
Yeah, and so those
more difficult.
It looks like those are all down here. It says Arabic is category 5 down here at the bottom. So,
well,
what are your thoughts on that map, or just the differences between languages in learning them?
Man, I would be interested to know what they mean by reading and speaking proficiency, because 24 weeks in category 1. So if you're going from no language, that's 6 months, right? Basically, you're about half a year.
What is that, 8 hours a day classes? I mean, good
Even
night.
with that, to be reading and speaking proficiently in half a year, that's pretty aggressive.
Yeah. Well, and maybe as a diplomat, maybe the context of a diplomatic government thing, maybe it is insane. Maybe it is really
they're smarter than us.
Well, that probably too. But you know what, man? It's like, I don't know how many hours a day you can actually learn before it starts to not even be helpful anymore. Because when I was doing intensive when I first moved here, it was 3.5 hours a day. I can't remember exactly because we had like a break or 2 in there. Intensive on Zoom Monday through Thursday. And by the end of that 3rd hour, because we were Zooming so fast, every day you were learning new stuff. We're zooming through the basics. And so like by the end of the 3rd hour, it's like my brain, because we're not even reviewing, it's new. And my brain would just be dead. And I'd have a migraine after 3 hours, and I had to stop. Like there's only so much you can even force in there in one day.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not reviewing, then you're not going to learn it. Actually, that's
Yeah.
a really important part of language learning, or of learning anything, is you actually have to start reviewing. So what you're trying to do is to decrease that kind of that curve of forgetting. You can put a whole bunch in, and in a couple days or a week, you have forgotten all of it. So you need to
Hmm.
revisit that as you start to forget it.
Hmm.
But I had that same experience. Going 4 hours a day. We were in person. We would do
Hmm.
2 hours and then take a break and have some chai and some cookies, and then we go back at it for another 2 hours. And by the end of it, you
Hmm.
are exhausted.
Oh yeah.
I don't.
And if you're not someone who's ever been mentally exhausted, like before I was a pastor, I was a manual labor guy, I was a blue collar guy. And the first time I remember having mental exhaustion from doing like desk work, learning style work, I was like, what is this? I'm used to my
Yeah.
body being tired. What is my brain can be tired?
Hmm.
Legitimately, it's wild.
Oh yeah. And well, so it was wild for you and me when we moved to Pakistan. Rosie was 5 weeks pregnant or so, 7 weeks pregnant. We just found out right before we went, so she's probably eight
Wow.
weeks. So she's doing that initial language learning while being pregnant. So
That's unreal.
I thought
Did
my brain hurt.
so you guys probably learned together then, since you were
We
doing it in
did.
person? Yeah.
Hmm.
Did you get like a nanny for the other kids? How'd you do that?
Hmm. So we were learning together.
Hmm.
Initially, we had one tutor that came, and we started together, and we shared time with him. And we also had a nanny that was in our house who
Oh,
would take
nice.
care of the kids.
Hmm.
And
Did you
then,
ever do separate study then later?
once the
Okay.
baby came,
Ah, of course. Hmm.
so probably those first 6 months we stayed together, and
Hmm.
we learned pretty much at the same pace. Then the baby came, and culturally it made more sense for her to get a female teacher
Hmm.
because the baby would be in the room, and she needed to move at a different pace. She would need to stop to feed the
Sure.
baby. And so I had a male, she had a female teacher, and then we split up
Hmm.
and studied separate.
Well, that makes sense too, because like you have different goals, and you don't really consider this until you're on the field. So
Hmm.
me as the man, I'm like, man, I need to learn this as fast as I can possibly. And your wife idealistically wants to as well, but she also has kids and she's taking care of the home. And
Hmm.
so when we moved here, it was during COVID, and so we couldn't do any in-person classes anyway. So we, through different means and praying and talking to people, I went into this super intensive course that was like 4 days a week,
Hmm.
and that was wild. I did that for like 4 months before I went down to a private teacher, because that was like in a classroom setting, like on Zoom, like 10 other people, and then I went to a just me and my teacher after about 4 months, 4 days a week, but just for like, I don't even know, maybe 2 hours. And I started to taper down slowly. At first, like first 6 months, I'm like gung ho, and then you're like, okay, I
Hmm.
gotta back off so I can retain some of this. Um, so I did that, and then my wife got a private teacher from day one. She's been with the same lady for 3 years, over the internet on Skype. Hasn't met her. I don't think she's met her in person a single time.
Wow.
2 days a week, 2 days a week, and she's been doing that for 3 years. And so she's learning slower. But what's neat about that is that I've actually been able to help her, because like, oh yeah, I remember when I learned that I could not understand it, and then this made it click, and so then I can actually help her.
Hmm.
So that was kind of helpful too, even though it was more from necessity, not by strategy, but it ended up being beneficial in the end.
It's actually a proven kind of fact in learning. So I teach in a university professionally, right? So I do a
Okay.
lot of teaching. I teach nursing right now. I'm also a nurse by trade,
Hmm.
and we have a learning theory, the novice to expert theory. And one of the things that it posits is that sometimes the best teachers are not the experts, and it's for this point that you just made. Novices, or just when you get beyond that novice into those middle ranges of expertise in any field. So in my field,
Hmm.
it's nursing. You've been at it for a couple years. Uh, you haven't been at it long enough to forget the struggle of trying to learn it. The problem with experts,
Ah.
you get an expert language teacher, and
Hmm.
things are so just easy for us because we're an
Hmm.
expert. They go, it's just like that. Why don't you get it? Can't you
Hmm.
understand it? So actually, what you're doing is really strategic. and I don't know if there would be a way to build it into language learning.
Man.
But people who have more recently worked through that struggle know what their thought process was and the
Yes.
learning process to help them get over that hump. And they can communicate that to you where a lot of times the expert can't.
And it makes sense in language learning too, now that you put it in that framework, because like the language and we both have really great language teachers. They're so good at what they do. But they're both native Hungarian speakers who, learned English at at least C1, if not C2 level. And we'll talk about that. I wanted to talk about what those levels are of language learning. But C1, C2 level for sure, learned it in college, learned it at a scholastic level, but they're not English speakers by mother tongue. And so they're teaching Hungarian very well. But I know what it is like as an English speaker to learn Hungarian. And so I can talk to my wife, be like, you know what? That didn't make sense to me either. But you know what made it sense? It's kind of like this. And, you could say that to your Hungarian teacher all day and they'd be like, maybe you're right, but technically speaking, that's not right. So I can't say yes. But you're like, but it doesn't matter if it's technically right. That's what made it stick up here. That's what made me remember it. Or that's what made it make sense,
Yep.
So
yeah, that's really important in learning. Getting somebody who knows how to get you over the humps.
Yeah. So I guess if you went to the field as a young couple with no kids, yeah, I mean, you have no reason not to learn together and to do it together and share your struggles and help each other. But if you're going to the field with kids, like I guess I wouldn't even suggest what is better, but like, don't feel bad if you're like, we can't learn together. So you guys learned together for a short time and then separated. We never learned together at all, as far as like in the same classroom together. And honestly, my wife didn't want to. She's like, I don't want to be in your super intensive stuff. She's like, I can't handle that. Like, just let me go at my own pace. If it takes me 10 years, it takes me 10 years. I'm going to get there. And I'm like, do your thing. So yeah, I guess if anything, just to give missionary the freedom, like if it doesn't make sense, it's okay, because then whoever's ahead can help the other one. And your kids can help you too, because they'll pick it up even faster than you.
Oh yeah. Once those kids get into school, then you're going to be learning from your 8-year-old. They're going to be correcting you all the time.
Oh, me and Judah practice all the time. He'll be 6 in May, and he's been in Hungarian kindergarten. The school levels don't equate to America, but basically pre-K and kindergarten. He's been in almost 3 full years now, and I wouldn't say that he's at the exact same level as other Hungarian 6-year-olds, but he's not translating. He's past the point of translating. When he's speaking Hungarian, he's speaking it. And it's fun to watch him. And so I'll ask him questions sometimes, like, be like, buddy, do you know the word for whatever? Some word that a kid uses, but you don't. Like, I don't need to know the word for, okay, if we're on the beach and he's going to grab his shovel, for playing in the sand. I don't know the word for shovel. I've never needed the word for shovel. He knows it because he uses it at school all the time when they're playing in the sandbox. I'll be like, do you know the word for shovel? And he'll think, like, yeah, I think it's this. Okay, good job.
Yep. Oh yeah, our kids were in an Urdu school. Our boys, the older ones. So, yeah, same thing. They needed a few months, and then they're off and running.
Crazy. And kids they have this boldness of, most of them. There's different personalities, but they're not worried about messing up and sounding dumb like I am, like we are.
Right.
Like, I don't want to sound stupid. Kids don't mind. They just jump right in and start figuring out how to communicate.
Oh yeah, that helps a lot when there's no shame. But it's interesting when you do look at language. It doesn't matter what language or how hard it is. Basically, all over the world, when you take a healthy mind and a healthy environment, kids all learn language at basically the same pace.
That's wild.
So, a Hungarian child doesn't know that Hungarian is one of the most difficult languages to learn in the world. But if you were to compare a Hungarian 2-year-old and an English-speaking 2-year-old, they're going to be at basically the same place in their language development, even though they're very different languages in different places.
That's so wild. So let's do this. I'm curious. So how old were you when you started learning Urdu, when you went to Pakistan?
What did I say, 10 years ago? So I'd been 34.
34.
35.
Maybe you can speak to this too. Because I want to compare the 4 languages that we speak here. So English, Hungarian, Urdu, Spanish. I think it'll be really cool for people. How old were you when you started learning Spanish?
Probably 15, maybe 16, 17.
Wow. So completely different.
Yeah.
So Do you want to take a minute to speak on the difference between learning a language when you're younger, like teens and 20s versus 30s? Because there is, I know that there's a difference, but I don't have the firsthand experience.
Yeah, part of that too would just come into style. We'll come back talking about language learning style and the approach to it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in high school, I was learning it as a student, but your mind you're built for learning at that age.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're all you're doing is learning. I was a pretty good student anyway, so I like to learn. Um, but you know, and even if you were to back it up even further, kids learn fast, like we were just saying.
Right.
But if you were to leave Hungary now, for like we did, we got kicked out of our country, and my kids were speaking at the same level that I was when we left, or better. They learn fast, but they also forget fast.
I've heard that.
Well, unless they've been there long enough to really establish that as a primary language. So now my kids can hardly speak at all. I'll speak to them in Urdu, and they'll go, "What?"
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it was hard work for my wife and I, but those hard gains, they stick. So we can still talk to each other in Urdu, even though we've been out of the country for 5 years now. We haven't had the opportunity to primarily use it.
Sure.
I think motivation, more than the age, being 15 or being 35, I think motivation was a bigger factor in language learning. Age definitely played a part in it. By the time I'm 35, or your general 35-year-old isn't in a stage where they're trying to learn. They're not as adept at learning as they were when they were 15 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's different for you and me because we're trying to be, Bible scholars, or we're trying to be pastors, right? So we still have it.
We're in that student mode to some degree every day.
For life.
Yeah.
So we
That's
have
true.
a regular routine of studying. If we're doing what we should be, then we're studying regularly, right? We're studying language, like I mentioned earlier. We're diving into the words, or maybe sometimes Greek and Hebrew, and these words that we don't know, and
diagramming sentences,
diagramming, and parts of speech and all of that. So that, I think that's different than you're an engineer, or you're settled into a career, and now you need to go back and start learning again. Just from a secular standpoint.
Yeah.
So I'd always been a student because I'm always trying to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and His Word.
Did you find it harder to retain it in your 30s, like when you're learning new vocabulary and grammar concepts, than it maybe it was just quicker when you were in your teens and 20s?
Yeah, definitely that is true. I think my mind was sharper, and I would hold on to stuff when I was a teenager much better than I did.
Gotcha.
I remember having to review a lot more, struggling through the process of getting those words in there.
But it doesn't mean it's not possible. It probably just took more work, right?
Yeah, I know what that is. Just give me a minute. There are a lot of those moments.
And you know what? Speaking back to your point you made earlier about the process of learning is, kind of elongating that forgetting curve, right? I think, with SRS, spaced repetition systems and memory systems, that forgetting, being like, I know what that is. Let me look for it. Let me search in my Rolodex. That's part of the learning process too, because you're creating more synapses in your brain. So it's, even though that part sucks, that's actually really important for going from short-term memory to long-term memory, from passive vocabulary to active vocabulary. And that's really frustrating, but also like you can't get around that. Like you have to go through that like physical act of searching for the word for it to then stick longer.
Right. And so that too, there's a lot of evidence, a lot of science around that. The devices we have and all of the shortcuts we have built into our society, and the convenience of tech, everything's right here, has brought us to a place where we actually don't know how to use our brains as well as we used to. The work of recall is something that younger generations are losing compared to.
Because you don't need to remember everything.
Right.
I never.
When I was a kid, we had to memorize phone numbers.
Yeah, that's right.
The only phone numbers I have memorized now are ones that I remember from 30 years ago.
Right. They're like,
I can still tell you my best friend's phone number from when we were kids.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I still remember Domino's Pizza.
Yeah,
Near
exactly.
Philly, Ohio. Yeah.
But you know what? I couldn't tell you Pastor Sam's phone number.
Right, right. Even though you're texting and calling all the time.
Right. I could tell you Brandon's because I knew Brandon when we were kids before we had cell phones and pagers.
Yeah.
You know, our
Yeah.
first phone, I memorized his and
Right. Flip phone. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there is some inherent difference learning a language at different stages in life, but it's not impossible. You might have to work
No.
harder.
Yeah.
What about the difference between Spanish and Urdu? So Spanish being a more Latin based
Mm-hmm.
language versus and Latin alphabet versus Urdu, not Latin based and not a Latin alphabet, squiggly lines alphabet. To not that sounded really mean. I didn't mean it mean. It just like to an American. You're like, man,
You're American. That's what it is. Yeah.
Hungarian's really hard, but at least I recognize 90% of the language or the letters. So it's like, okay, at least I can read. But yeah, so can you compare, and I'm going to pull up here while you're talking the language tree so you can reference that if
Nice.
you'd like to. But
Yeah.
what was some of the differences between learning those two languages?
Yeah. So, English is difficult because it's not phonetic. You get all kinds of different pronunciations for different vowel. The same vowel combination could give you 4 different ways of saying something.
Mm-hmm.
Urdu uses Spanish uses the same alphabet, but it is phonetic. So when it came to reading, even if I didn't know what the words were, you could sound it out. I didn't know what it meant, but I could say it properly.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
Urdu is the same way. Urdu is very phonetic. Even though the alphabet, like you said, is squiggly lines to anyone who hasn't looked at it, basically it's the Arabic alphabet, if you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks very, very different. And okay, so if you look on the tree, you're going to see Urdu up there by Hindi, kind of right in the middle. Spanish is off on that other branch with the Romance languages.
Yeah.
So there are different branches on the tree, but actually there's a lot of similarities in terms of the structure of those two languages.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you want to explain the tree, just like 30-second version to people who don't understand? If you're not watching on YouTube, I've got a very famous picture up about what's called the Indo-European and Uralic language families, and it's in a picture of a tree.
Yeah. So it's just trying to map all of the languages of the of the world essentially, and to say how they relate to other languages. So it's creating language families. And within language families, you have more similarity. So if you're in the
and
same
where they
family,
evolved from, right? Like kind of where they originated from. Yeah.
Yeah, so we know we could trace all language originally back to one, and then we know that God confounded languages, and and then you can look, through the history of language, and linguists can tell you that even out of a certain number of core languages, they kind of evolve over time as people move around, and you get people that speak 2 different languages that come together, they start to create their own language. Actually, that's really what Urdu is. Urdu is known as the language of the horde, or the language of the army. So it was multiple different peoples coming together that had some similarity in their language, or maybe not, and they had to figure out how do we communicate with each other for the purpose of conquest.
So it's an amalgamation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
And so, yeah, that shows you kind of how to trace the roots back and where they come from, and then what's related to what.
Yeah, and so if we're just looking at like, the Indo-European tree there. Now, by the way, for anyone, if you want to zoom in real small, not on the big tree, but on this little demented shrub off to the side, you have the Uralic or Finno-Ugric languages, and if you have Finnish, Hungarian, and like Estonian, and like and then some little teeny languages I've never even heard of. So yeah, that's one of the things that makes Hungarian fun, is it's like not related to anything in the middle of Europe, and it's not related to any of the European languages.
Right.
But so on the branch that English is on, and for people not looking at this, or for people who have not seen it before, the size of the leaves area, I believe, correlates to the size of like the language, like how many people speak it. That's why English is so large. Mm-hmm. So English and German come from that same Germanic branch. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to learn German, there's going to be a lot of crossover in what are, I believe the word is cognates, words that are spelled similar, sound kind of similar, and mean the same thing. Now, if you go over to the Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, those are all going to share similarities, but they both connect. The Romance languages and the Germanic do kind of sprout from each other. So even if there's going to be some similarities somewhere in the languages, but then if you, I don't know, is Urdu on the tree?
It is up right in the middle. You see Hindi. Hindi's the bigger.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
just to the right.
Yeah. So yeah, Urdu is going to share some similarities with the ones that are surrounding it.
Right.
But then again, so with this picture, Urdu and Spanish don't really have many similarities, but you said they did. What did you find similar?
Well, Spanish is very much sometimes I lose words in all languages. No matter how many you speak. Gender. It's a gender-based language, a lot more than English. We have few words in English that are gender-based. You have actor and actress, and that'll denote. But in Spanish, you have to learn how to deal with gender in basically anything you want to say. So the first time you're learning a language that functions like that, it takes a lot of practice because that's not natural to us as English speakers. Urdu is the same way in that everything has a gender, and since I'd already worked through that and found a way to put that into my brain, there was overlap there. Sentence structure is different from language to language, so you can look at your subject, your verb, your object. What order do those things go in? Will determine how you produce a sentence. English and Spanish are different, but Spanish and Urdu are much more similar.
Oh, okay. So like in the sentence structure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or order of the sentence. Nice. Okay.
Yeah. So, so those things help. And then there were actually a few just, random overlapping words.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. And not just like internet and email?
Yeah. The new words, the tech words, they're the same everywhere, right?
Yeah, telephone. Oh, I know that word.
That was the best. Or brand names. You'd hear somebody rambling on and before you can speak, and you hear Pepsi Cola right in the middle of it, and you go
Facebook. Yeah,
I know that one. No, like in Spanish, a camiseta is a t-shirt, right? But in Urdu, it's camise. So it's a very similar word. I go, oh, okay. I don't know why. I guess you got to go further back down that branch. And
sure, could be. And there's even different things depending on, like you said earlier. So depending on overlaps in languages, sometimes have to do with the history of a nation and like who conquered someone else. Mm-hmm. So like the Turks ruled in Hungary for like 150 years, I believe, and so there's some similarities between Turkish and Hungarian. That's only because the Turks imposed them, and so for 150 years or so, there's some similarities. So there's silly stuff like that too. Like, oh, why did they have that same word? And you don't really know. But it had something to do, maybe not even with where the languages came from, but where they overlapped historically,
Mm-hmm. It does get interesting, and this is off topic a little bit, but when you start to look at the roots of words, and even in English, we have words that we've picked up from all different places.
Oh, so many. Yeah.
And you go, how did we have Urdu words that we use in English. How did that get there? I don't know.
Right, because there's sometimes you just, as an English speaker, you assume when you hear a word you recognize in another language, you're like, oh, it's the same as in English? Like, well, that's not an English word. That's a French word or whatever. It comes from a language older than yours, man.
Because we're ethnocentric, we think they got it from us.
Yeah, right. And you only speak one language. You're like, oh, cool, use the same word. And like all the time you hear like, if you say absolutely over here, they say absolute. It's like, oh, I'm sure that lots of languages probably use that absolute as like a certainly, absolutely,
Yeah. Are there Hungarian words that we would know in English?
There are some. It's funny. We were talking about this beforehand. One of the things that makes different languages harder or easier to pick up as an English speaker is the amount of overlap. And so I did a little research this past week, and I saw estimates anywhere from like 40 to 50% overlap between English vocabulary and Spanish vocabulary. But of course that depends on what vocabulary and, what you're learning and whatnot. But yeah, so it's like, okay, maybe if you're learning Spanish, maybe you only need to learn whatever. Out of 10,000 words, maybe you only need to learn 6,000, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But in Hungarian, it's like virtually, zero. And so, other than the technology words, you've got some random ones that I'll hear. They'll be like, oh, I know. So like absolute. I was trying to think of one. I'll only notice them if they come up in conversation, but it's so little my brain sometimes feels like it's a computer that's constantly downloading a new language packet download, and it's just never ending. It's just like it's just gonna be running for because my connection speed's really low, so it's just like one word at a time for like eternity,
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
it's just interesting how so obviously grammar is different. And
Yeah.
like, so every language has different grammar things. So like Spanish, the gender is going to make it hard. In Hungarian, one of the biggest grammar things is that it's a agglutinative language where you're gluing a bunch of suffixes and sometimes prefixes onto a word. And so the words can get astronomically long, comically long even.
So that just means that you're just always adding a part to make a word, right?
Yeah. So okay, let's see if I can do a live example right now. I should have been prepared, but whatever.
Come on.
I'm not prepared. So let's take a word like
A word like man, which we understand and define. Then you'd have a word like mailman. So you've added a descriptor to it. That's an agglutination of the word.
Mm-hmm.
It's combining two different parts to define one new word.
Right, and even like adding the ing suffix.
Yeah.
It takes
Mail
like
manning.
right, mail manning, right?
That's what
So
they do.
sail, it takes a verb sail to sailing. It's now a noun, and we have a lot of that too.
Yeah.
So like if we just take like a word like lehet means it's possible or you can do something lehet. Now if I say lehetsége, that means it's a noun now. It's the possibility. Now if I say lehetséges, now it is possible to do this, but it's a different form of speech. Another way to say something is the hot het suffix makes something. So like lehet means something is possible. Well, if you just take hot or het and add it to a word, that means it can be done, or you're asking, can I do it? Here's a better word. So segít. Segít means to help. Now, if I'm helping, it's segítek. I help. And so you have to do that with every part of speech. If you help, it's segítes. But if I want to say, can I help you? Like as a question, I can say segíthetek. So, it's like, okay, now this can start to get really long here, But then if you take simple words like to eat, enni is the infinitive. Enni is the infinitive of to eat. But if I say I eat, it's SM. It's like, well, the only similar letter is E on the beginning of that, SM. Well, if I want to see can I eat? I can eat ehettek. If I want to command you to eat, it becomes egyél because it's just so many different conjugations and suffixes you have to memorize that it becomes like a computer code,
Mm-hmm.
What's something I was going to say what's something that was like super not specific or special, but something unique about Urdu or Spanish that when you learned it, you're like, oh, that's wild. I don't do that in English. My English mind has to learn to do something new here, other than like the gender thing.
Other than the gender thing, well, I think a lot of it when you first start learning a language, because you don't realize how much conjugation, for example, you don't realize how much conjugating you do in your native language. You've never thought through a conjugation table,
right,
for any given word, right? So it feels like it's unique the first time you start working through conjugations, and like you were just talking about, there's some words are not the same at all once you start to conjugate them, and then that you go, well, that's stupid. Why is this language so difficult?
Right.
But if you were to step back and start to think about it, we do the same in English. There's some verbs that conjugate completely irregularly.
That absolutely.
You just never. You didn't learn conjugation tables when you were learning English, so you don't think about it.
Yeah.
And coming away from your question a little bit, that's a challenge though in language learning, is that it's easy to get frustrated, and when you get frustrated, you fall back to what you know, and what I know is right, and so therefore this is stupid.
And you can begin to resent it a little bit too if you
Yeah.
lose your focus. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, we can even kind of skip over to this for a little bit here because I wanted to talk about some of so as a missionary, you don't mean for this to happen, but your identity becomes completely enveloped in the mission that you're doing, of course, because like that's the only reason you're here. Like any other person's vocation, at some level, you do the job and you get to go home and kind of clock out. But when you're a missionary, where you live is a constant reminder of why you're supposed to be there. And so it can be hard to quote unquote clock out. And so when you're struggling with the language, which is, the primary thing you need to do so that you can do your job for the long haul, man, you can really, and I speaking from experience here, you can really struggle with self-doubt and self-worth issues. You want to, let's just open up that conversation if you don't mind. Do you mind sharing just candidly about dealing with that kind of stuff on the field? And I can chime in as well.
Yeah, as you're going into the language, there's going to be little struggles all the time. And I remember going, we haven't really talked about language, like the approach to language learning, but we were using the GPA method. So we're learning a ton of vocabulary and practicing it. And I'm learning words that, in retrospect, as I look back, a bunch of words that I didn't need up front. Like I could name all of the animals. But what I realized is that I don't know the name for all the vegetables. And if I'm trying to survive, because we moved to Pakistan with no language.
Yeah. I'm going to the supermarket, or not supermarket,
I've got to go to
the market.
I've got to go to the market. It's not super. I got to go to the market, and I've got to buy some vegetables from this guy. Man, if he was selling elephants, I could buy elephants.
Right, exactly.
And I went to the market one day, and Rosie had given me a list of things I needed, and we probably had gone over the words, and I just couldn't remember them yet. And I was supposed to get, like some carrots and some cucumber, and I thought I asked for carrots and cucumber.
Oh no!
And I got carrots and radishes.
Oh, there you go.
And so apparently I had the wrong word. And now I don't like radishes. I don't know what we're gonna do with them, but I'm in this dilemma where I'm like, I don't know how to tell this guy no. I don't want the radishes.
Did you just buy the radishes?
I just bought the radishes.
I've been there.
And apparently I can't get the right word for cucumber, so now I just gotta either I'm too proud to ask for it, so I just go home with carrots and radishes, or I gotta point and be like, I need that. I knew how to say what is that, or I need that. So, so there's those little frustrations, and if you can't smile at yourself and laugh at the little frustrations in the process, then you're going to get overwhelmed real quick, right? Because you're going to have those all the time, and in the moment they feel really frustrating, and you go home and your wife's like, "Why did you get radishes?" And now I've got to relive it.
I didn't want to look stupid.
I got to tell my wife because I'm an idiot, because I don't know the words, because I don't know, that just came out. Or the guy just couldn't offload radishes.
Right, or he had no idea what I said, and he took a guess, like, I don't know, maybe this is what he...
Exactly. Maybe he was playing a game. I don't know. But we have radishes. I guess do something with them or throw them away. I don't care. But so little things can get real frustrating. Sure. And I'm sure we could spend 30 minutes sharing stories about dumb things we've said.
Oh, yeah, of course.
and it's funny now, but in the moment, it's challenging, and you just think my only objective here is to learn the language well enough so that people can hear the word of God. Yeah. And I can't do that. And then that will start to translate into these feelings of failure, the feelings of maybe I'm not cut out for it, maybe I can't do it. And if we're really not careful, those can lead into frustrations with the Lord, because God, you brought me here.
And you're praying every day, Lord, teach me this language, teach me this language. Right.
This was your idea. This is your mission. You got to teach me this language. I feel like I'm putting the time in. And, so it can get really challenging. And when you look at, language learning, it kind of corresponds with the the phases of culture shock. Those first few months, you feel like you're learning, and you add 2 words, and you feel good. But then you get to that place where you need to be growing faster, and you're not. And so culture shock sets in at that same time. You start to get into this funk where you go, I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And
And when
then,
you're first learning a language, it was this way for me, and I see it sometimes with people who are like learning on Duolingo just at home or something. When you're at the very, very beginning, like you're not even A1. Oh, and before we're done, we got to explain the levels, even if it's
yeah.
briefly, so people know what we're talking about. You're not even A1. You have to get to the point of being A1. You're A0. You're a beginner. You don't know anything. That's when you're the most confident. It's so funny because you learn 50 or 60 or 100 words, and you're like, dude, I basically speak this language.
Right.
I can count. I know elephant. In Hungarian, it's elefant. There's a cognate.
That's easy.
So yeah, man, I
It's,
basically speak this language, but then after you've been learning for a couple months and you actually start to realize how much you don't know, and you now know enough to know why your language is so hard or why it's so different from your mother tongue, that's when it really starts to set in the reality of how hard it is to do something like this. And maybe even just that, it's good to be humbled, but that also that the realization of how big the mountain in front of you is, that can be tough to deal with. I know it was for me.
oh yeah. I think I'm sure God designed it that way because there's important lessons that come out of it. There's important learning time. You really start to learn to depend upon Him. If you're really going to start learning to pray, yeah, you really got to learn to not be concerned, with what people think about you. Hey,
Yeah.
Ezekiel, don't be afraid of their faces. Don't be afraid of their languages either. Whatever. And you gotta not be a respecter of persons or not think too highly of yourself. All of these things are important
Sure.
lessons that come out of that phase because you're trying to figure out the language. But for us, we get the importance of the language, the why, the necessity of deep language understanding. I think is built into any missionary who's got a right mission, a right vision. I can evangelize with a translator. I can evangelize with pretty limited language, and you can see people get saved. I've gone in other countries and evangelized with a translator, and people
Yeah,
get
of
saved.
course.
I could come to you tomorrow, and you could translate for me. Someone might get saved, right?
Sure.
But that's not the end goal, right? That's not the mission.
Yeah.
And discipleship is a heart level endeavor. If we're going to disciple people, we have to talk about those personal struggles. We have to talk about those hard things. We have to learn to become a counselor. We have to be able to communicate our own heart and experience. But then you've also got to be able to bring God's heart into it, right? And so you have to have language in order to be an effective missionary. If you're accomplishing God's objectives.
And
Church planting demands it.
yeah, absolutely. And maybe so as like pastors and missionaries, prospective missionaries, when you go from, okay, God has called me and my church is sending me, and then so it's like what's my first step to going to the field, and it usually has something to do with deputation, selling your stuff, moving your family into an RV, whatever it is. There's a process and there's checklists that have to be done. Getting visas, figuring out how to get to the field. There's a list of things to check off and to do. And one of the things we put on the list when we arrive is learn the language. I got to check that box.
Yeah.
But then you start to realize that like learning the language isn't a box that you check. It's going to take you, even though, and if you're with a mission board, I'm not, I was an independent missionary, and I know you went with an organization, but you're an independent missionary with independent church. Even if you're with a board, they're going to say, okay, for the first 12 months or 24 months, you're going to be in language school, and then you'll be doing ministry. So you just kind of assume, okay, I will learn the language over the course of the next year or two, and then I will be a pastor. So like, check that box. But that's not how it works.
Right.
You built a foundation and you move. And so like, if people can readjust their expectations of what language learning is, and it really is a lifelong endeavor. I know I've made a friend here who's been a fantastic mentor. He's a veteran missionary. He's been in Hungary for 30 years, speaks the language fluently. And I'll ask him, hey, I'll pick his brain sometimes. How do you, what's a good way to say this in Hungarian? And because he's a pastor, he knows what I'm getting at. And he'll be like, you know what, man, that one's hard. And I've asked people here what they would say. And it's like, he's been here 30 years. And he'll sometimes ask people, how would you say this? And it's a lifelong endeavor. Now there are goals that you should be striving for, communication. That's a huge milestone. When you can just communicate on the street and you understand more than 50% of what they say to you, and you can communicate what you want to tell them, even though it's not grammatically perfect, that's a huge milestone.
Right.
And you got to celebrate that victory. But that's not the end either. It's continually working at it.
Oh yeah. I remember being in Mexico when I was learning Spanish and going out with a group of young people. I was in college at the time, and I was learning the language as my primary objective. And I told a joke, and it landed, and everybody laughed.
Oh wow, yeah,
yeah.
That's a big deal.
I could still remember that moment even today, because that's such a huge thing. If you've learned a language and you're trying to, you know what that's like. That's a whole nother level of actually going beyond that casual broken conversation. I was like, I told a joke and they got it and they laughed at it.
Or if you can read a meme and understand the joke.
And memes are even, a lot of times there's culture built into that too.
Right.
It takes more than just language. There's so much underlying that.
Yeah, man. And I think just, with that idea of self-worth and stuff, you have to, and I've talked to so many different pastors and missionaries, just like asking their advice, picking their brain, and what the theme always comes back to: put in the work, but remember, God doesn't need your success, he needs your obedience. Just obey. Just put in the work and obey and do what he's asking you to do. Something that's been really encouraging to me the last couple of months and reading through the Bible this year is hitting Moses and learning a lot from him. And we always kind of skim through the part where Moses is arguing with God that he doesn't want to go, and he says, well, I don't talk good. And God's like, well, I'll be with your tongue. And he's like, oh, well, no, I shouldn't. He's like, okay, well, I'll send you Aaron, and I'll be with both of your tongues. And it was really encouraging to me, because like when you read the rest of the Exodus story, you don't even like realize that, because God he doesn't give the redundancy of that everything he said it to Moses, then Moses said it to Aaron, then Aaron said it to Pharaoh, and he was speaking through a translator that whole time. But even before the translator, God promised to be with Moses' tongue too.
Right.
And so like, even if we struggle, like God promises to be with our tongues, and he's gonna help us. And if we have to use a translator, I preach with a translator right now because I'm not good enough to preach and be understood, to be understandable. God promises to be with my tongue and with my translator's tongue, if I'm obeying and if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm praying and preparing the way I'm supposed to. And so we don't have to feel completely incompetent before we're at that level of fluency that we want to be at. But man, it takes a lot of work to get there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I had that same thought right as you were saying it, in terms of identity. If our identity is rooted in our ability, like my ability to progress in the language, then we will get frustrated. If we can keep our identity rooted in our obedience, right?
Yeah.
Like God has called me to come and to do this work. And yes, it's a hard work. And I am identifying as someone who is trying to be like Christ. My striving is language perfection. That's a lifelong battle. But so is sanctification. Like, so is be ye holy, for I am holy.
Yeah, amen.
You're never going to arrive at that one, right? So I'm not, I'm frustrated with my sin and discouraged by my flesh. Yeah, but if I build my identity into that side of me, then I'm always going to be frustrated. Like I have to root my identity in Christ. And the same thing, I think the same thing is true in our language learning. Like, just be a worker. I don't think we can overstate how much work there is to learning a language.
Yeah.
And as long as you're putting in your time and going at it, like, find identity in the fact that God sent you to do a mission and you're being obedient to that.
And there's different strategies, and maybe that'd be a good place to land the plane is some of the strategies and things you
Yeah.
can do. But yeah, really, like you said, the only way you could do it wrong, the only wrong way is to not try and to go to the field and be like, well, I'm just going to use a translator because I can't learn their language.
Hmm.
Just try. Okay, so I'm moving to the field in my 40s or 50s, and so it's unlikely that. Okay, but try. Just
Hmm.
try. Yes, you're probably gonna use a translator, maybe even for the entire time you're there. I don't know. But what if over 10 years you pick up enough that you can at least converse brokenly with the people, even though you don't feel comfortable enough to teach? You gotta try.
Yeah.
But as far as strategies and stuff, there's so many different ways. Let's do this quick. Let's show them the CEFR, the ABC language
Hmm.
levels. I'll pull it up in my screen share here.
Yeah, pull that up. But you sing in Hungarian. I was watching you
I
the other
do.
day.
And then you know what? That helps a lot. That helps me a ton with learning the language, James. Like I can't believe how much. And again, I'm not fluent at all. But singing and music, especially, and I'm a musician, so it helps me stick and it helps it stick in my brain. And there'll be words that because you know this from being a missionary. Not all songs are translated like, of course,
Hmm.
word for word, but not even line for line. Sometimes they just try
Right.
to make the melody fit.
Yeah.
Sometimes the theme of the song kind of changes. So even though you're singing, I don't know, whatever, Amazing Great. Well, okay, that's not a good one because that translates really well into almost every song. Whatever. Battle Belongs. Phil Wickham's song. I really love it. I just taught it this past Sunday in our church. In Hungarian, it's the title is translated "You Fight Beside Me." So the
Hmm.
theme of the song is still fighting, but it's
Mhm.
not in the same, you know, the battle belongs to God. No, they're in Hungarian they reword it to fit the melody, and it translates more of you fight alongside me, and I'm not
Hmm.
alone, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
No, yeah, music really helps. I still remember, James, not to get off tangent too much, but I remember the first time that I sang a song with my friends, and it was a song that I know in English, and I was singing it in Hungarian, and it was really emotional for a second because it was like,
Hmm.
whoa, like I'm worshiping God in a second language, like a language that is not my mother tongue.
Yeah.
That was really momentous for me because I'm like,
Oh
wow,
yeah.
to think that I can worship God in a second language. One of those little tiny victories, of like,
Oh,
okay,
absolutely.
you just got a pile of rocks to look back on, be like, yeah, I remember that. We can do this. We can move
I
forward.
told that joke. I sang that song. Yep.
Yep,
We
absolutely.
we'll sing songs in Spanish occasionally here at MBT. We've got
Oh,
60
nice.
or 80 Spanish speakers in our church, and every time, like, there's something in my heart that gets excited. Like, it
Yeah,
takes me back to. I'm like, I can worship God in this language too. We don't do Urdu songs here. Maybe we
so
should.
cool, so
Yeah.
cool. Let's now here. This is a random website here,
Hmm.
but it's a decent breakdown. So basically, the way that Europe and it's kind of becoming a standardized way of how to measure your language level. It's broken down into beginner, intermediate, and advanced, with two subdivisions in each category. So A is beginner, B is intermediate, C is advanced. And within those, you have A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. Now, C1 and C2, you might as well forget about those for a long, long time. That is like you're basically fluent, and the difference between C1 and C2 is like, I don't even know, mother tongue versus just a really good speaker. Like, okay, forget about those. But moving through those A1, A2, B1, B2, a lot of times in Hungarian too, the books and the curriculum is broken up into those uh, levels. I don't know about these little blurbs it's got underneath them. I don't know how true that is. A1 beginner vocab level, about 700 words, approximately 100 hours of study. A2 vocab level, 1,500 words, about 200 hours of study. That might be roundabout correct. It probably depends on the language you're learning, but
And so those two steps can come pretty quick. If you're
yeah, they can.
doing, if you're doing 30 hours a week,
Hmm.
10 weeks, you should be up at that A2 level. If you're doing 20 hours a week, you'll be
Well,
there in
and
2 weeks.
that probably depends too of like, does it mean hours of book study versus hours of practice? Because it's like, I don't know if
Hmm.
like count my hours of study in the classroom, but then, does that include my homework time or my just, going to the supermarket I'm not sure how that
Yeah, I don't
factors
know.
in.
But no doubt, those first steps come quicker than those intermediate steps.
Yeah. So like if the A levels are like this big, and then the B levels are like this big, and then the C
Hmm.
levels are infinite. Yeah, it's definitely not a linear scale by any
Right.
means, and that kind of messed me up. It's like logarithmic. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's exponential.
how long did it? Well, okay, this isn't even a fair question. So give me, just guess.
Okay.
Spanish versus Urdu. How long do you think it? B1 is a really good goal because it gets like I'm at a B1 really trying to break into the B2. B2 is like you're not really translating anymore. You're not advanced, but like you can have pretty good conversations with people without having to struggle too much. How long
Hmm.
did it take you to get to that B1 level of I can communicate, it's broken, I don't understand 100% of what I'm hearing, but I'm doing pretty all right.
In Spanish and Urdu?
Yeah, yeah. Compare them if you can.
Sure. Well, so lang- style of learning is different. And I approach
Hmm.
both these languages very differently.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah. So, I started Spanish when I was in high school. So it was driven by what the teacher did. It was heavy on
Oh,
verb
duh. You said that.
conjugations.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's stuff that you could, take a quiz. It's vocabulary list and verb conjugations, things that they can grade you on and check off on,
Hmm.
but not necessarily things that immediately build together,
Hmm.
right? So you
And there
can
was
learn
no
it,
immersion because you're learning it in high school.
right? You do it for 40 minutes in a classroom with a bunch of other high schoolers who mostly don't care. And so there's all kinds of disruptions. Nobody wants to study. I was a
Mm.
little weird as a high schooler because I was already thinking about missions.
Oh,
And
nice.
so I actually felt like I really should learn Spanish because not everybody speaks English. So I
So
should
you took
just
it
learn.
seriously.
I should learn something. So I
That's
took it,
good.
I think, more seriously than anyone else in my class. But you talk to a typical high schooler or college student who's taken 2 or 3 years of a foreign language and who didn't care about it. They can't speak anything.
No. Yeah,
It's
of
like
course.
taco burrito.
Right. Quesadilla.
Yeah. Um, so getting there with Spanish, and that was
That's
20 years
probably not
ago.
fair in Spanish though, but yeah, I didn't think about that because you did high school, but then you moved on the field, and then that probably expedited the process of getting to that intermediate level or
Hmm.
increasing your intermediate level.
Yeah, when I moved to El Salvador, I already had a really good foundation in Spanish.
Hmm.
I already had a lot of vocabulary. I probably moved to El Salvador starting at a B1.
Nice.
When I moved to Pakistan, I was not even an A1. I had
Yeah.
I had two words. Pajama. That's actually
Yeah.
an Urdu word that we use.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But so when we went to Pakistan, we used what's called the GPA, the growing participatory approach.
Okay.
And the idea is that they'll give you a bunch of vocabulary, and then you want to start listening to it and using it. It's kind of like a lamp method. You want to put it to use as quickly
Mm-hmm.
as you can,
Yeah.
right? So the more we'll give you words, the more you use it, the better. And I
Mm-hmm.
think our vocabulary ramped up really fast. Whatever that just said, 100 hours. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
we were doing
Oh yeah.
20 hours a week. I would say I had A1 type of vocabulary. Yeah, within 4 weeks probably.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're like taking language learning as your job seriously, then yeah, I'd say depending on the difficulty of your language, 1 to 2 months, you should be in A1. It's also kind of
Hmm.
hard because you're like, am I an A1 speaker? Am I in that level? It's like,
Hmm.
what? Am I not really an A1 until I get into A2? I don't know, but yeah, it's like for me my goal was how fast can I cruise through A1 and A2 to
Hmm.
become a B1 guy. And in Hungarian, it required learning so many crazy, complicated grammar structures that didn't exist in English. It
Hmm.
was like, it probably took me a year, I'm guessing, a year to year and a half to get to B1, to like get to the beginning of B1
Hmm.
legitimately. And then I've been in B1 probably ever since. And I'm like, encroaching on breaking through into B2 now. I mean, it's all approximations, but like
Right.
there's definitely like plateaus. Did you have those times where you feel like, man, I learned so quickly, And then I've just been on this plateau for like a weightlifter or something. I can't
Oh
hit the
yeah.
next PR.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, you'll feel like you're stalling out,
Mm-hmm.
and so then the approach is: do I dive in harder, or do I take a break?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and I think this is true for most people. Taking a break actually helps a lot. Like,
Interesting.
yeah, disconnect from the language for a couple days.
Yeah, not 6 months, right?
Right, you're not going. Don't move back to New Philly and just dive back into English.
Right,
If
right.
you could take a couple days and say, I'm gonna have a retreat from Hungarian, a retreat from Urdu, and
Mm-hmm.
all I'm gonna do is get back into English. And then when I would come back into it, like my mind was maybe more relaxed. It had a chance to
Mm-hmm.
rest. It's not working all day every day. It's not using much of that processing power.
Yeah.
I always felt like if I would take a break and not try to study or learn for a weekend or something, I could come
Mm-hmm.
back stronger.
And refreshed. You even get that mindset of
Mhm.
like, okay, I can breathe a little bit. All right, let's get back into this thing.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're a young missionary or planning to be a missionary, don't be afraid to take breaks. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're on one side, we're telling you have to do a lot of work. If you're not
Yes.
willing to work 8 hours a day, then you're a loser. You're not going to make it. But um, you got to get some breaks.
Yeah.
Let your brain relax, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll grow faster.
Yeah. Let's
It's
land the
weird.
plane on strategy. So for
Yeah.
sure, when you get there, you need to find now if depending on when you get to the field and who you're going with, and are you joining a veteran missionary, there's going to be a lot of different inputs. But if you're like me and you get there and it's really like I got to figure this out, you start googling and you're like, okay, am I finding a private teacher, am I finding a school, what have you. My wife, we went with a private teacher, who just works for herself, and it's been great, um, for her as a mom with little kids. And for me, I went through an actual school at first, and now I study privately, but with a teacher who's from that school. So you got to do that, and
Hmm.
hopefully, like my language is a small, difficult language, but it actually has a lot of good resources. I've talked to guys, missionaries who are in small language groups that don't have a lot of good language resources because there's nobody trying to learn that language. Like there's not a lot of foreigners, so they don't have built out curriculum for teaching foreigners their language. So you got to figure it out. Let's just assume wherever you're going has resources or a school or a teacher you can hire. When you're doing that, I figured something out that helped my wife initially. When you're doing that first year of language study in school or in class with your teacher, you're going to learn the grammar in class. Yeah, you're going to learn some vocab, but you're paying them to teach you the grammar. You can
Hmm.
learn the vocab on your own, and you need to.
Hmm.
Download Duolingo kind of sucks for grammar or for vocab. I kind of hate Duolingo. Drops, whatever. Find an app and just learn vocabulary. Get on Google, get a dictionary, and learn vocabulary on your own. Learn the grammar in the class, and then you combine them because you need both of those things. You need grammar and you need vocabulary. But you
Yeah.
can do vocabulary on your own while you're doing the grammar during the class time hours.
Hmm. Yeah. So we had the same approach. We had private tutors and started learning and sentence structure. Quickly you need to get into that sentence structure,
Mm-hmm.
grammar type stuff. That A1, it's basic grammar. I
A1
would
and
say
A2 really,
it's
yeah.
vocab. You
Mm-hmm.
start with a ton of vocab, and then you
Yeah.
start putting it together.
Yep.
But then grammar gets complicated, and this is why people hit those plateaus. You said you're at B1 for a year and a half,
No.
2 years, and you
Right.
feel like you're stuck there. And we get into these areas of just stalling out, and I think there's a few reasons. Um,
Hit me.
I don't know. Okay.
No, help me.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, give it to me, man.
uh, One, when you're a beginner, that you don't know so much, and everybody knows you don't know so much, and a lot of times people want to work with you more.
Mhm.
People will correct you. It's fun to teach a baby how to talk. It's not
Yeah.
as much fun to teach, a 12-year-old.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Everybody loves it. Like they see you, and even though you're a grown man, they go, he's a baby. I'm going to teach
Hmm.
him, and so they want to jump in. When you get to the place where where you start to sing in your language and you're having general conversation, then people feel like you have a little more mastery than you actually do. And for me,
Yeah.
in my culture and with the language, people would really back off on correcting me then.
That's a good point.
I didn't get as
Yeah.
much input from all of even from my local friends.
Yeah.
Like, I know I'm not saying this right. Can you help me out? And they would back off
Mm.
on that.
There's even less resources in B1, B2 because
Mm-hmm.
all the money to be made as a foreign language teacher teaching to foreigners, it's all in the beginner level. So for
Mm-hmm.
Hungarians, most of the teachers, they're making their money on beginner level classes because people take A1 for 6 or 8 weeks and then quit because they're like, forget
Right.
that. And so they're just perpetually teaching the same like 8-week class. And then
Mm-hmm.
the people who graduate and keep going are fewer and fewer and fewer. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
no, that
money
makes a
is in the
ton of
content.
sense.
It's easier to build that content if you're doing a bunch of grammar or
Oh yeah,
vocab.
it's Duolingo stuff, right? It's
Yeah,
yeah.
the most basic stuff.
Yeah.
Once you get to a place where you're teaching a little more in your native language, I found that another place where it became extremely difficult for me to get help and feedback. Especially in a church setting, because then people saw me also as a spiritual leader. They started seeing me
Oh,
as a
gotcha.
pastor. They start seeing
Sure.
me as their teacher.
Yeah.
And maybe it was more cultural for where I was, but you can't correct your elders. You can't correct your teachers,
Interesting.
even if I would ask them to.
Wow.
So now because I'm pastor, well,
Teaching
I'm on my
has
own.
also been very helpful to me too. We started our
Yeah.
church as of today, 3.5 months ago, and having to teach every week with a translator. But I'm studying with both the English and Hungarian Bible because I'm translating my points and I'm making, I'm doing the word studies to make sure these cross references work and all that kind of stuff. That's been really helpful. But it's also a very specific vocabulary that's for
Yeah.
church, and it's not going to help you with your everyday conversation. And I guess the point that I wanted to get at as far as like strategy. So you have to go to school for
Yes.
whatever amount of time, but you don't learn how to speak in school. You learn how to speak by speaking. And that's the part that's really not fun when you suck at the language and you sound dumb or you don't understand. And so where I'm at right now, I probably don't need to take a language lesson every week, but I really enjoy it. And my teacher's great and she helps me a lot. I have to put way more time into speaking. My goal this year is to speak way more, and to make myself speak with our friends, even if they speak English really well, because I'm at that point where I think to break through into B2, I just have to practice way more. And things that I'm translating in my head have to become automatic. So
Yeah.
for those who are like, you go to the field and you're in your first year and you're doing the language school, you're not going to learn to speak the language sitting in the chair. You have to get out and use it, and you have to do stuff on your own. So do other stuff. Find apps. Something cool I found in Hungarian, James, online. I found there's a couple of teachers who made a Patreon business where you subscribe to a newsletter. And I don't know, I pay them like maybe $10 a month. And they send me a newsletter 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, that has a small dialogue, 60-second dialogue that they record and they write out. They give you the translations and they give you like a grammar note of the day where they explain something.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, so every day, if I don't do anything else in Hungarian, which is not likely, but at the very least, I'm spending 10 to 15 minutes reading that newsletter at the beginning of the day. So it's like, what did you do today? Even if you don't have school today, you don't have class today. Did you spend 15 minutes? Did you spend a half hour doing something with the language? Did you listen to a YouTube video, a podcast? I mean, YouTube is amazing. Just follow YouTubers who are in your language and just listen to them, even though you don't understand half of it, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the value of listening, with the resources we have now is huge. You can grow a ton. And we could talk about, all the different things that are out there, and especially with AI. I haven't even dug into what are the AI
I
language learning
just
tools that
started
are
dabbling.
available.
Oh, yeah. Wild.
But I think, an important point, you'll listen to us talk and, you hear Kale say, I hate Duolingo. Well, that's fine. Kale hates Duolingo. For any individual language learner, I think if you find things that you enjoy and will use, then
Yes.
then
Yeah.
that's good.
What works for you? Yes.
What works for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You might love Duolingo, and you go, oh well, because Kale's further along than me, I should hate Duolingo. No, don't start hating Duolingo. Use it if it works for you. If it helps you engage in the language, then use it. Right. So this Patreon thing that you found, it sounds like you love it, and you do it every day. And if you love it, then it's going to have a lot more value than if if I were to ship you a book of 500 Hungarian verb conjugations. Like,
exactly.
I hate reading about verb conjugations. Then don't read about verb conjugations, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it depends on what level you're at, right? So like in that A1, A2, you got to conjugate verbs, man. Nothing you can do about it. But then once you're getting into that next level, okay, well, studying verb conjugations, maybe that's not how you progress. Maybe it's actually getting out, speaking, and having to use the verb conjugations and not just writing them out. But yeah, the goal is like you have, when you get there, you have to do classes, but you're not going to learn the language just in the classroom. Don't expect your 1 or 2 or 3 hours a day in the classroom to be all you need. You got to do it on outside the classroom too. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You got to, and it's so valuable beyond just the language conversation. Trying to learn language builds relationships, sets you up for the gospel. If you're trying to plant a church, your heart should be for relationships anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So it just feeds everything you're trying to do. So I was out in the market every afternoon after we get done doing the classroom thing, and then eat lunch and then take a break. Then my wife had to sleep because she was pregnant and her brain was done. And I would go to the market and I would just meet people.
That's awesome.
And that's it. Like especially in the A levels. It's like, I just got to go out and talk all that I can. Once I started reading, and then I think reading really helped me in that B level, getting into that B2, C1.
Yeah.
I did a lot of reading and a lot of listening.
Yeah. And I would say, for sure, whatever level you're at as you're progressing, read something every day and listen to something every day. And that can be as simple as literally just scrolling Instagram or Facebook and reading posts in your target language.
Yeah.
And then intentionally listening to something in however you do it. YouTube's super easy nowadays. And that's changed just in the last 4 or 5 years, honestly, James, even since you've been back from Pakistan, that YouTube has become this massive wealth of resource in this kind of a way. But yeah, that's awesome, man. Hey, dude, thanks so much for just talking about all that stuff with me. That was really fun to kind of decompress all the stuff I've been thinking about and learning. And hopefully in 4 more years, we'll just be talking about like how I became fluent in Hungarian.
Yes, that's where we'll be next time.
Or Jesus will be back. That would be better.
Either way, you'll be fluent.
Yeah. There's a joke around here that what language do they speak in heaven, right? And people argue it's Hebrew or English or whatever. And so, the joke that I heard people would say is that, well, no, it's English because, God knows the Americans can't learn another language. So, but they say here that it's Hungarian because it will take you eternity to learn it. So
there you go.
But man, James, thanks so much, man. I appreciate being able to pick your brain about missions and language study, man. And anything else you want to mention about language to prospective missionaries out there, or maybe ones who are on the field and struggling right now with learning a language?
No, just hang in there. It's worth it. The hours are worth it. The headaches are worth it. The migraines, all of it is worth it. In the end, you will keep progressing. Keep putting in the time and doing it. It sucks, but man, what else are you gonna do? Yeah. You're on the field and you're trying to plant a church. What else are you gonna do with your time?
Yeah. Amen.
Not learn the language and not communicate with people.
Right.
Just keep going. Kale, thank you so much for putting me on here. It's exciting to see where you guys are at and to follow along with you guys on Facebook and other places and just see you. Like I said, I was watching you sing earlier this week as I was just thinking about your language and wanting to see where you were at. And that was super cool.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so it excites me to see you singing and out there just preaching the word, man. You're a great example for all these people. I'm glad you're doing this podcast too. I think you are producing some good resources. So
awesome. Well, thank you for contributing to that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anything I can do.
Well, there you have it, guys. I don't have much more to add because I know we went really long there, but man, just there's so many things that we could have continued talking about, but I think it was good to land the plane there. That man, no matter what you do, if you're going to the field and you're gonna be a missionary, you gotta learn the language, put in the work, put in the time. And if you're doing that already and you're having a hard time, you're struggling, man, just keep going, keep moving forward every day, take another step, and don't focus on where you're not, where you haven't been. Focus on where you came from. Focus on the difference between yesterday and today, last week and today, last month and today. What about a year ago? Look at where you were when you landed on the field and you are today, and how far God has brought you, and trust him that he's going to keep taking you. So keep working hard, keep practicing and using the language, and keep praying that God would give it to you. That's where I'm at right now, and I hope that in a few more years I can tell you guys the rest of my journey of getting to the point of proficiency, of hopefully fluency, and preaching in my second language. So thank you guys for listening. I hope this was beneficial to you. Remember, this podcast doesn't come out every week, so you got to have your notifications turned on, whether you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever platform is your favorite. You got to subscribe, turn on the notifications so that when I've got a new episode for you, you'll be notified. It'll always come out on a Wednesday morning, that you can be sure of, but you got to make sure you have your notifications turned on so that you know when we've got a new one for you. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will see you next time. Until then, God bless.